Vera Kostas had swept the same stretch of concrete for 31 years. The morning they walked her out, personnel carried her toolbox for her. That was the kindness they invented. Both her hands were full of that steel box, so she couldn't lift a single thing off her own bench on the way past. She didn't argue. She just walked. 2 weeks before that, the plant manager stood up at the Monday floor meeting. 90 of us were on the clock. Raymond Thibault looked out over the machines and he said it plain. "Every shop has a troublemaker. Ours finally has a name." Then he pointed. 90 faces looked down at their boots. What Raymond didn't know was this. For 26 months, I'd been keeping carbon copies of every form he told me to throw away. I kept them in an old Charles Chips tin in the bottom of my locker. That morning, they marched me to the gate. I opened the locker, and I took the tin. If you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. Before I go on, do one thing for me. Subscribe and comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Now let me start it where it really starts. My name is Vera Kostas. In 1974, I was 53 years old, and I ran the floor at Corliss Stamping Tool. Ran isn't the word they'd use. My title was shop steward, elected 3 times. But if you'd stood on that floor and asked any of the 90 who to go to when the check came up short or the guard came off a press, they'd have jerked a thumb toward the far corner where I worked. That corner was mine. Ashfield, Ohio. A stamping plant on the river road, red brick gone brown, a smokestack you could see from the Sohio station on Route 9. I had been there since I was 22. I came in the year they still hand-oiled the dies. I learned the noise before I learned the men. A stamping plant has a heartbeat, and once it's in your chest, you can't get it out. Big presses hit on a 2 count. Little ones chatter under it. You feel a jam before you hear it, the way the rhythm hitches, and every woman and man on that floor could feel it too. That was the family I had. That was the only family I had left. My husband was Stefan Kostas. He worked the night shift on the number 4 press for 19 years, and he died on it. 8 years back now. Middle of a January night, alone in that end of the building because they'd cut the second man to save a wage. The company wrote it up in one afternoon. 2 paragraphs. They called it his own carelessness. They said he reached where a careful man wouldn't reach. There was no witness. There was no photograph. There was no paper that said the guard on number 4 had been jammed open for a month because it slowed the line. And there was no paper that said I'd told the foreman about it twice. Because I hadn't kept any. In 1966, I didn't keep paper. I trusted that the truth was enough, and I buried a good man on the strength of that trust. I never made that mistake again. After Stefan, something in me went quiet and stayed quiet. People took the quiet for softness. That was their error, not mine. I started keeping records, not out of anger, out of arithmetic. A thing that happens and leaves no mark might as well have never happened. So I made the marks. Every grievance somebody brought me, I wrote it up. Every safety slip, every short check, every guard that came off a press, I wrote it down twice, once on the top sheet and once on the carbon underneath. The top sheet went where the company wanted it to go. The carbon went home with me, in the tin, under my galoshes, in the bottom of the locker. Habit, mostly. That's what I told anyone who asked, and almost nobody asked. I'm a tidy woman. I keep receipts. I keep the church bulletins and the gas bills and the carbons off my own grievances, because paper is the one witness that doesn't get scared and doesn't forget and doesn't retire to Florida. I'd have told you back then it was just how I was built. I didn't yet know I was building a case. You never do while you're doing it. You only find out later what the tin was for. There was a boy on the floor that spring who put a fresh ache in me every time I looked at him. Wendell Boyd. Everybody called him Wen. 22 years old, back from Vietnam a year, hands that still didn't know what to do with themselves in peacetime. He'd taken a spot on press number 6. He was quiet, the way men come back quiet, watchful at the edges, and he had a way of ducking his head when you spoke to him that put a stone in my throat. Because Stefan had that same duck of the head at that age, same set to the shoulders. I'd catch Wen in the corner of my eye, and for half a second the years would fold, and it would be 1943, and my Stefan would be standing at a press with grease to his elbows, not knowing yet what the place would take from him. I looked after Wen without letting him see me do it. That's the only way you can look after a young man who's proud. I made sure his line got the good stock. I made sure the older hands didn't run him ragged on the setups. And I watched that number 6 press, because number 6 was a bad machine. And I had it in writing that it was a bad machine. And I want you to remember that. 2 years before any of this, I filed a safety complaint on press number 6. Dated. Carbon in the tin. The guard on it was undersized for the die they'd started running, and I wrote in my own hand that someone was going to lose a hand on that press. I filed it. Nobody read it. It sat in the tin like a seed in the ground, waiting for its season. I want you to understand the man on the other side of this, because he wasn't a monster. Raymond Thibault was 47, and he wore a tie on the floor, which the old plant managers never did. He'd come up out of an office 200 miles away, and he had head office in his eyes the whole time. There was a regional job dangling in front of him, a district. He talked about the plant the way you talk about a car you were trying to sell. Friction-free, that was his phrase. He wanted a friction-free plant to hand up the ladder, and I was the friction. Not because I fought him. I almost never raised my voice at Raymond. I was the friction because I kept writing things down, and a man like Raymond understands, somewhere down under his good haircut, that written down is the thing that follows you. To Raymond, my paper was clutter. That was his whole misunderstanding, and it cost him everything. He'd stand at my corner and look at the little metal file box on my bench, and his lip would do a thing. "You and your forms, Vera," he'd say. "Half the trees in Ohio." He told me more than once to stop copying grievances after they were settled. "Toss the originals," he'd say. "It's noise. Nobody reads those." He never once thought to wonder where the copies went. Why would he? A man who thinks paper is just paper doesn't lie awake over a chip tin in a widow's locker. It started small, the way these things always start small. That's the part people get wrong when they tell it back later, all thunder and lightning. There's no thunder. There's a docked overtime slip. We'd had a rush order that March. A truck outfit down in Kentucky needed a run of brackets faster than the schedule allowed, and Raymond wanted them out the door to look good upstairs. So the floor gave him a Saturday. 12 hours, the whole crew, on a weekend, with the plant cold and the coffee bad. We hit the number. Brackets went out on Monday's truck. Everybody was proud of it in that grumbling way men are proud of a hard job done. Then the checks came, and the Saturday premium wasn't in them. Not all of it. Raymond had shaved 4 hours of overtime off the whole crew and called it a scheduling correction. It came to maybe $9 a man. Not enough to starve on. just enough to sting, and just enough to teach us that the extra mile was a road that only ran one direction. I went up to the office about it, and Raymond didn't even pretend hard. "File it if you want, Vera," he said.
He was signing something and didn't look up. Nobody reads those. So I filed it. I wrote the grievance out longhand at my bench, with the floor roaring around me. Docked overtime, the date, the crew, the 4 hours, the rush order it came from. Top sheet to the office, where it would die. Carbon into the tin. That was warning number 1, and it went into the ground with the rest of the seeds. And Raymond walked away, sure he'd won a small thing. He had won a small thing. That was the trouble with Raymond. He kept winning the small things, and he thought that was the whole game. The second one wasn't small, and it had a witness. By April, the same rush order fever was on the presses every week. Head office wanted numbers, and Raymond wanted the district job. And the way you make a stamping line go faster than it's built to go is you take the safety guard off. A guard on a press is a cage of steel bars that keeps a man's hand out of the die while the ram comes down. It also costs you 2 seconds a cycle, because the man has to clear the cage before the machine will fire. 2 seconds a cycle across a shift is a lot of brackets. So somebody up the chain decided the guard on press number 6 could come off, and the setup man ran it open to make the count. I found out because I felt it before I saw it. That hitch in the floor's rhythm. 6's 2 count coming too fast, faster than a guarded press can go. I walked over, and there it was. The cage swung back and pinned, the die going bare, a man feeding it by hand, with the ram coming down 18 inches from his fingers, 800 times an hour. Merle Dietz was standing right there with me. Merle was the second steward, and he'd been my friend for 20 years. We'd trained on the same presses. He'd carried a pallet of Stefan's things out to my car the week of the funeral without me asking. Merle stood next to me and looked at that open guard on number 6, and he said, low, "That's going to put somebody in the hospital." And I said, "It's already in writing that it will." I filed the complaint that afternoon, a written safety complaint, guard bypassed on press number 6, the exact die, the exact hazard, and my own 2-year-old warning attached by reference. I had Merle witness it. He signed under my name, Vera Kostas, steward, Merle Dietz, steward, witness. Top sheet to personnel, carbon to the tin. That's the tin's second showing in this story, and I want you to keep count, because the tin only comes out 3 times, and the 3rd time is the one that matters. Personnel was a man named Harlan Voss, 50s, soft-handed, the kind of company man who's found that the way to be safe is to be useful to whoever's on top. Harlan lived to be indispensable to Raymond. My complaint landed on Harlan's desk, and Harlan did what Harlan did. He stamped it. No action. 2 words and his initials. He sent me back the pink copy with those 2 words on it, like he was doing me a favor letting me have it. He didn't understand what he'd just done. He'd taken my warning and put the company's own stamp on the ignoring of it. He'd signed and dated the decision to leave that guard off. He thought he was closing a door. He was setting the second seed, right next to mine, in the same ground. And that carbon, the pink one, no action, initials, date, went into the tin too. Now here's where the small things stop being small. Because I hadn't only been keeping paper that spring, I'd been keeping cards. There were 40-some of us who wanted a safety committee with teeth. Not a grievance you file after a man's already hurt, but a committee that could stop a press before it took a hand. I'd been going around at lunch, quiet, 1 man at a time, getting names on cards. Whoever wanted the committee signed a card. I had a stack of them growing in the tin next to the carbons. It was legal, It was protected. I knew that much even then, that a worker has a right to organize his fellows for their own safety, and no boss can lawfully punish him for it. I knew the right existed. I trusted, God help me, that the right would protect itself. That was my blind spot, and I paid full price for it. Somebody told Raymond about the cards. I didn't know who then. I'll tell you when I knew. The Monday floor meeting was a thing Raymond had started, standing us all down for 10 minutes at shift start so he could talk numbers at us. That particular Monday, he didn't talk numbers. He got up on the little raised platform by the tool crib, where you could see the whole floor. 90 of us gathered up with the presses idling behind. That rare quiet when the machines are off and you can hear a man cough on the other side of the building. And Raymond looked out over all of us, and he let it go quiet a beat too long, the way a man does when he's about to enjoy something. "A plant runs on trust," he said. "You trust me to keep the doors open. I trust you to do the work. But there's always one. Every shop has a troublemaker. Somebody who'd rather stir the pot than earn the wage." Another beat. "Ours finally has a name." And he pointed at me. 90 heads turned, and then 90 heads turned away, because there is nothing on this earth harder to look at than a person being singled out for punishment while you keep your own job by staying quiet. I don't blame a one of them. I've been the one looking down. But I stood there in my corner with my hands at my sides, and I felt every eye come and go. And I understood exactly what he was doing. He was calling the safety committee a troublemaker's stunt before it could grow. He was making it cost something to sign my card. And he was doing it in the one place where the humiliation would carry the farthest, on the clock, in front of the whole floor, so that the word troublemaker would be hanging on me by lunch. I didn't say anything. What I did, and I did it without deciding to, was reach into my apron pocket and take out my little spiral pad and write down the date and the time and the words in front of him while he watched. Every shop has a troublemaker. Ours finally has a name. His face did a thing when he saw me writing. For just a second, the smallest second, Raymond Thibault looked at me writing him down, and something crossed his face that wasn't triumph. Then it was gone, and he went back to being sure. Men like Raymond are always sure again by the next breath. It's how they sleep. That was the 25% mark of my life, if a life had marks. The public one, the one everybody saw. And here is the terrible arithmetic of it. He named me the troublemaker on a Monday, over safety cards, 2 weeks before the thing I'd been warning about in writing for 2 years walked up to press number 6 and happened to a boy who reminded me of my dead husband. It was a Thursday, late in the shift, the tired part, when hands get slow and the ram doesn't. I was at my bench when the floor's rhythm broke, and it didn't hitch this time. It stopped, the whole 6 line going dead at once, and then the sound came that you never forget once you've heard it. A man's voice going up past where a man's voice is supposed to go. I was moving before I knew I was moving. Everybody was. It was Wendell Boyd, 22, back from a war with both hands, and now this. The guard was still off number 6. It had been off for weeks by then. His hand had gone into the die, and the die had done what a die does. And when they got the press stopped and got him free, the hand was still on him. That's the one mercy in it. He kept the hand. But the skin, and most of what makes a hand a working hand, had been peeled back by the machine. Degloved, they call it. And I will not describe it further than that, because Wen is still living, and it's his to describe or not. He kept the hand. He never got back the full use of it. A young man who'd survived a war lost half a hand to a company that saved 2 seconds a cycle. I rode in the front of the ambulance because I made them let me. I held his good hand the whole way to Ashfield General. He was gray and shaking, and trying even then, to say he was sorry, like it was his fault. like he'd done a thing wrong by feeding a bear die because the setup man told him to keep the count. I told him to hush. I told him none of this was his, and all of it was written down. He didn't understand what I meant. He wasn't supposed to yet. Now, you'd think, wouldn't you, that a company watching a boy bleed on the floor would find some remorse, some flicker. You'd think the very least they'd do is put the guard back on the press that took him. What Corliss Stamping Tool did instead was open a file on me. Not on the press, on me. Within the week, Harlan Voss started building a record. Tardies I never had, dug up out of 2 years back and stamped fresh. An insubordination memo about a foreman I'd never been written up for crossing. A note on my attitude. A note on my quote-unquote disruptive influence on the floor. Every scrap of it dressed up to look like a performance file. A paper case that Vera Kostas was a poor worker who ought to be let go, when the truth stood there, plain as the smokestack, that they wanted me gone because I'd been signing men up for a safety committee, and now a man was maimed on the exact press I'd warned about, and I was the only person in that building with the paper to prove they'd known. I found out later how thick Harlan's file got, and how fast. He worked at it like a man building an alibi, which is what he was. Every memo he wrote to bury me, he dated. Every one he signed. He was so busy manufacturing a reason to fire the troublemaker that it never once occurred to him that a fired troublemaker's whole complaint, later, in front of the right people, would be that the firing was punishment, and that the freshest, best-dated proof of the punishment would be his own file. Harlan built me a weapon and stamped it with his name and thought he was building a cage. It's the same mistake Raymond made, worn on a different man. They both thought paper was just paper. And I still didn't know who'd told Raymond about the cards. I'd find that out in the second half of this. Hold on to the question. Somebody close to me carried it up to that office. Somebody who'd signed his own name as a witness on my safety complaint not a month before. And when you learn who it was, it'll sit in your chest the way it sat in mine. They fired me on a Tuesday morning in May. They did it the polite way, which is the cruelest way. No shouting. Harlan came to my corner at shift start, with a foreman on either side of him, the way you'd come for a man you thought might run. And Harlan said, "Mr. Thibault would like to see me in the office." I knew. You always know. I'd known since the boy went to the hospital that they'd have to be rid of me now, because I was the walking, note-taking memory of the thing they most needed forgotten. Raymond had the papers laid out on his desk in a neat row like a place setting. He didn't stand up. He told me the company had decided to end my employment. He said it just like that, decided to end my employment, a sentence built by a lawyer to have no blood in it. He said, given my record, they were prepared to be generous. And he slid a paper across the desk. It was a resignation. My resignation. Written for me. It said that I, Vera Kostas, was resigning my position voluntarily. It said that in exchange for $2,300, I waived and released any and all complaints, grievances, and claims against Corliss Stamping Tool. Voluntarily. That word again. He'd made a paper that took the thing they were doing to me and dressed it in my own signature, so it would look like a thing I'd chosen. $2,300 to sign away Stefan's justice and Wen's and my own, all at once, quiet, no fuss, friction-free. He told me I had 21 days to think it over. He said it kindly. 21 days, Vera. After that, the offer's gone and the file stands. Meaning, after that, they'd fire me for cause on Harlan's stack of memos, and I'd get nothing and carry a bad record besides. He thought that was mercy. He thought he was giving me time to be reasonable. He had no idea he was giving me time to drive to the county seat. I didn't sign it. I didn't tell him I wouldn't sign it. I didn't argue a word. I looked at Raymond Thibault across that desk, and I thought about my Stefan dying 2 paragraphs worth on a night shift with no paper to speak for him, and I thought, not this boy. Not when. This one's got paper. I said I'd take my 21 days. That's all I said. Raymond looked almost disappointed I hadn't fought. He wanted the fight. The fight he could win. What he got was a quiet woman folding her paper and putting it in her apron. Then they walked me out. That's the part that was in the papers later. The part people tell back to each other. 2 foremen and Harlan walked me from the office toward the gate, past the floor, past all 90 of them at their presses on the clock, because they timed it for shift, so everyone would see the troublemaker escorted off. And here's the small evil I'll never forget. When we got to my locker so I could clear it, a personnel man reached in and lifted out my toolbox. All my own tools, 31 years of them, my father's calipers in there, and he carried it for me. Carried it. So my hands would be full the whole walk to the gate. So I couldn't, on the way past my own bench, my own corner, pick up so much as a rag that belonged to me. They wanted my hands occupied and empty of anything I might take. A last little cruelty dressed as courtesy. But I'd already reached into the bottom of that locker, under the galoshes, behind the toolbox, and I'd taken the tin. It rode out under my arm inside my coat, a Charles Chips tin gone soft at the corners, 26 months of carbons and pink no-action slips, and 40-some safety committee cards, and my own 2-year-old warning about press number 6. They carried my toolbox to make sure my hands were empty. My hands weren't empty. My hands were fuller than they'd ever been in my life. I just didn't let it show, because I'd had 8 years of practice not letting things show. They walked me through the gate, and a foreman set my toolbox down on the gravel outside it, on company generosity, in the drizzle, and the 3 of them went back in without a word, and the gate rolled shut, and there I was, 53 years old, 31 years gone in a morning. My whole family still inside behind chain link, heads down at their machines, and a chip tin under my coat. I stood in that drizzle a while. I won't pretend I didn't. Then I picked up my toolbox with both hands, the tin still tucked against my ribs, and I carried them to my car. And I sat behind the wheel with the rain coming down the windshield, and I let myself have exactly 1 minute. I gave it a minute. For Stefan, and for Wen's hand, and for 31 years. 1 minute in the parking lot at Corliss Stamping Tool. Then I dried my face on my sleeve, and I started the car. I did not drive home. The county seat was 40 minutes off, a courthouse town with a federal building the color of a wet cracker, 3 stories, government brown, a little brass plate by the door for the regional office of the Federal Labor Relations Board. I'd looked up where it was 2 nights before. I'd looked it up in the phone book at my kitchen table after Wen came home from the hospital with his hand in a cage of gauze, and I'd copied the address onto the back of a church bulletin, and I'd told nobody. Not Merle. Not a soul on the floor. Because I'd learned what happens to the things you say out loud and don't write down. And I'd learned too, though I couldn't have named it yet, that somebody on that floor was carrying my plans up to Raymond's office. I parked outside the wet cracker building with the tin on the seat beside me. I sat there a moment with my hands on the wheel. And I want to tell you what I did not do, because it matters as much as what I did. I did not go home and stew. I did not call a lawyer and threaten. I did not walk back onto that floor and shout Raymond Thibault down in front of his 90. There's a version of this story where I do that, where I make a scene, and it feels good for an afternoon, and it changes nothing, and the guard stays off number 6. That's the story Raymond expected. The troublemaker makes trouble, and the trouble washes off a company like rain off brick. I went the other way. The quiet way. The way with the paper. I carried the tin up the courthouse steps and inside, past a directory board with white plastic letters, up to a counter on the second floor, where a young woman with cat-eye glasses asked how she could help me, and I said I wanted to file a charge. She slid me a form. Of course she did. It was going to be paper all the way down, and paper was the one language I was fluent in. I filled it out at a little stand-up desk by the window with the rain on the glass. I wrote that I had been fired from Corliss Stamping Tool in retaliation for protected activity. I wrote that the protected activity was organizing my fellow workers for a safety committee. I wrote that the retaliation followed a public statement by the plant manager naming me a troublemaker, made in front of 90 witnesses on the clock that I could date. I wrote it in my own hand, plain, the way I write everything. No heat in it, just the facts, stacked up in order the way I stack the carbons in the tin. Then I signed it, Vera Kostas. And I dated it, because a thing without a date is a thing that never happened. And I was never going to let anything happen without a date again, as long as I lived. I handed it across the counter to the young woman in the cat-eye glasses. She stamped it, and that stamp, that ordinary government stamp on an ordinary government form, was the loudest sound I made in this entire story. Louder than anything Raymond ever said on his platform. She gave me my copy the way Harlan had given me my pink no action copy, except this copy didn't say no action. This one said the machine had started. The federal government of the United States had, as of that date, a piece of paper with my name on it, and Corliss Stamping Tool's name on it, and there was no ungiving it. I put my copy in the tin, on top of the 26 months, and I closed the lid. Nobody at the plant knew. That's the part I need you to sit with as this chapter closes, because it's the whole engine of what comes next. I drove home in the rain with a filed federal charge in a chip tin on my passenger seat, and behind me at Corliss, Raymond Thibault was already telling head office he'd solved his friction problem. He thought he'd bought my silence with $2,300 and 21 days. He thought a widow with a file box was a woman who'd send angry letters nobody read. Harlan thought his memos were a cage. Both of them believed, right down to the ground, that when they carried my toolbox to the gate, the story ended. And there was one more. There was the friend. There was the man who'd signed as witness on my number 6 complaint, and then walked something up to Raymond's office for a price. And he was still on that floor, still a steward, and he believed the most dangerous thing any of them believed. He believed the files died the day they walked me out. He believed the tin was just a tin. They were about to find out what a quiet woman does with 26 months of dated paper and nothing left to lose. But first, they were going to laugh. All 3 of them, in that office, over coffee, at the idea of me. She's got a chip tin against a company, they'd say, and they'd laugh. Let them laugh. I had the receipts, and I was just getting started. The first laugh came back to me secondhand, through a woman named Alma, who ran the cafeteria register, and heard things the way a drain hears water. She caught me at the Kroger on a Tuesday, both of us with carts, and she looked around before she leaned in. She said Raymond had read the charge out loud in his office. Read it to Harlan and to Merle over coffee, doing a voice, a little old lady voice, and they'd laughed till Harlan had to set his cup down. I thanked her. I bought my bread. I drove home. You'd think that would burn. It didn't, and I want to tell you why, because it matters to everything after. A man who laughs at you has stopped watching you. That's the whole gift of it. Raymond thought the story was over, so he'd turned his back on it. And a woman with 26 months of dated paper does her best work behind a turned back. Let me teach you the thing I'd learned, the thing they didn't know I knew. There's a word for what they did to me. The word is retaliation. It isn't about whether I was a good sweeper or a bad one. It isn't about tardies. The law doesn't care if Raymond liked me. The law cares about one thing and one thing only. Did the company punish me for doing something the law protects? And organizing a safety committee is protected. Filing grievances is protected. Standing up at a meeting and saying a guard is off a press is protected. Every one of those is a thing a worker is allowed to do without losing her job for it. So the only question the board would ask was simple. Did the punishment come after the protected thing? And in what order? Order. Dates. That's the whole ball game. And nobody at Corliss understood that they'd been keeping score for me the entire time. Harlan thought his file was a cage. Backdated tardies, an insubordination memo he'd typed the week they walked me out. He thought paper buried people. He was right about that. He was just wrong about whose paper. Because here's what a backdated memo is, once a board gets its hands on it. It's a confession with a date on it. Every slip Harlan wrote to make me look like a bad worker. He wrote after I filed something he didn't like. His memo about my attitude, dated the 9th. My safety complaint on number 6, dated 2 years before that. His insubordination write-up, dated 11 days after I turned in the safety committee cards. You line those up on a table, oldest to newest, and you don't need a lawyer to read them. The dates tell the story by themselves. First, she complained. Then, they came for her. Every time, like a drumbeat. I didn't have to prove Harlan was lying. I only had to show the order, and the order was in the tin. So, while they laughed, I worked. Quiet. The way I do everything. First thing I needed was when. Wendell Boyd had a hand now that opened about halfway and stopped. Degloved, the doctors called it, which is a word I wish I'd never learned. The skin and the meat pulled off the bone like a work glove pulled inside out, and they'd put it back, and it took, mostly. He kept the hand. He didn't keep the full use. 22 years old. He'd carried a rifle through a jungle on the far side of the world and come home whole. And it was a stamping press in Ashfield, Ohio that got him. I went to see him at his mother's house. He answered the door, and he wouldn't look at the hand, and he wouldn't look at me. I said, "When? I'm not here to make you a hero." He said, "Good, because I'm not one." I told him what I needed. I told him about the complaint I'd filed on number 6 2 years back, the one Merle witnessed, the one Harlan stamped no action. I told him it warned, in my handwriting, that somebody would lose a hand on that press. I told him his medical record and my old warning, sitting side by side in front of the board, were the difference between him getting his injury paid and getting nothing. He said, "I don't want to lose the job." And I understood him. God, I understood him. That's the sound of every man on that floor. Don't make waves. Keep your head down. Keep the check coming. Stefan said the same words for 19 years, and then the floor ate him anyway. On the night shift, on press number 4, with a guard bypassed to keep the line moving. And the company wrote it up as his own carelessness, because there was no paper to say otherwise. No paper. That's why I keep paper. That's the whole reason. I didn't say all that to Wen. I said one thing. I said, "Son, they already took the hand. There's nothing left they can protect you from. The only thing you've got left to lose is the truth, and that one you get to keep or give away yourself." He gave me the record, signed the release with his good hand. It shook. That went to the board too. Quiet. Certified mail, 40 minutes to the county seat. A green card that came back with a government stamp on it. Into the tin it went, on top of the 26 months. Now, the reporter. There was a fellow from the Ashfield paper who'd got wind of it somehow, probably from Alma, probably from the same drain. He called the house. He wanted the story. He wanted me angry. He kept asking me to say Raymond was a crook, a bully, a company man with blood on his hands. He wanted a headline that shouted. I told him no. He couldn't understand it. He said, "Don't you want people to know?" I said, "The people I need to convince don't read your paper. They read the file. And if I give you a shout today, tomorrow Raymond's got a clipping that says I'm a bitter woman with a grudge. And that clipping goes in Harlan's cage, right next to the tardies." A loud woman is easy to explain away. A quiet one with dated carbons is not. I'll take quiet. He printed 2 lines on page 6. Local labor dispute. Fine. Page 6 was exactly where I wanted to be. Because the whole time, the machine I'd started was turning without a sound. The board had my charge. They'd sent Corliss a notice. And that's when the second laugh stopped. Because a company can laugh at a widow. But no company laughs at a letter from the federal government asking it to explain itself under oath. Harlan built the defense. I heard about it the way I heard about everything now, sideways, through the cafeteria drain, through a machinist's wife, through the parking lot grapevine that runs through every plant in this country, whether the bosses know it or not. Harlan gathered his file, the tardies, the memos. He was confident. Merle told people Harlan slapped the folder on Raymond's desk and said, "This is 2 inches of proof she was a problem worker. Let her bring her chip tin. We'll bring a personnel record." 2 inches of proof. Every page of it dated after I complained about something. He'd built me a rope, and he thought it was a ladder. And then there was Merle. I have to slow down here, because this is the part that cost me. The tardies didn't cost me. The firing didn't cost me. Merle Dietz cost me. 20 years. 20 years we'd stood on that floor together. He was second steward. He signed as witness on my number 6 complaint, put his own name under mine, warning about the guard. He came to Stefan's funeral, and he carried 1 corner of the box. And somewhere, in the last 2 years, Raymond had found Merle's price, and it turned out to be a foreman's slot. A white shirt and a clipboard, and $9 a man to answer for instead of standing beside. Merle was the one who walked my safety committee cards up to Raymond's office. Merle was the leak. I'd felt it for months without letting myself name it, the way you feel a draft in a house and keep telling yourself it's just the season. I found out for certain because the board told me. They send you a list before a hearing of who the company means to call. And there was his name, typed clean. Merle Dietz, witness for the company. They were going to put my oldest friend on a chair and have him say I was disruptive. I read that name at my kitchen table, and I sat with it a long while. And I did not cry, and I did not call him, and I did not drive to his house. Because a thing I've learned about betrayal is that it wants a scene. It's hungry for one. It wants you to come pound on the door so it can feel like a fight between 2 people instead of what it is, which is 1 person selling another. I wasn't going to feed it. I put the list in the tin with everything else. Even that. Especially that. The hearing was set for a Thursday at the county building, the ugly one with the flag out front and the fluorescent lights that hum. The night before, I didn't sleep much. I sat at the table with the tin open, and I read the whole thing through one more time, front to back. 26 months of my own handwriting, and it read like a diary of a plant slowly deciding it didn't have to care. Docked overtime. A bypassed guard. No action. No action. No action, stamped in Harlan's ink, over and over. A man saying nothing so loud it echoes. And then Wen's press taking Wen's hand, right on schedule, exactly where I'd said it would. 2 years early on the calendar, and right on time in the ledger. I closed the lid. I set my father's calipers on top of it. The ones from my toolbox. The toolbox they'd carried to the gate for me, so my hands would be full. I don't know why I did that. It felt like bringing him. My father was a tool and die man. He believed a thing was true or it wasn't, and a number didn't lie, and you measured before you cut. I measured before I cut.
I'd been measuring for 26 months. Thursday morning, I wore the good coat. I carried the tin under my arm, the same tin, the Charles Chips tin with the rust spot on the bottom corner, and the lid that never sat quite flush after all those years in a locker under my galoshes. I walked into that county building carrying a chip tin, like a woman bringing a covered dish to a funeral. Raymond was already there. Gray suit, district office haircut, a leather folder in front of him thick as a Bible. Harlan beside him with his own folder, the 2-inch cage. And down the table a ways, not looking at me, Merle, in a tie. I'd never seen Merle in a tie except at the funeral. The examiner was a woman about my age, with reading glasses on a chain, and the flat, tired, fair face of someone who's heard every kind of man explain himself. She had a court reporter to her left, fingers ready. She called it to order. She said the government was here to determine whether Corliss Stamping Tool had unlawfully retaliated against Vera Kostas for protected activity. Raymond's lawyer went first. He was smooth. He said I was a chronic problem. He said the company had documented performance issues going back months. He said the safety committee had nothing to do with anything, that I'd simply been let go for cause, and here, he tapped Harlan's folder, was the cause. The examiner said, "I'll see the documentation," and Harlan handed it up, proud, 2 inches, and I watched his face while she read it, and I watched the exact second it started to go wrong for him. Because a man who's built a cage always forgets to check whether the door locks from the inside. She read for a while, quiet room, just the hum of the lights and the little clatter of the reporter's machine. Then she looked up over the glasses and she said, "Mr. Voss, this insubordination memo, what's the date on it?" Harlan said the date, and the examiner said, "And the safety committee cards Ms. Kostas circulated. When were those turned in?" Nobody answered, so I did. I said it plain. 11 days before that memo. She wrote something down. Then she picked up the next page and she said, "This attendance write-up, dated the 9th. And she looked at Raymond and she said, "Ms. Kostas filed her grievance on the docked overtime. When?" I said, "The 2nd, 7 days prior. It's in my file." And I set my hand on the tin. She said, "I'll get to yours. Right now I'm reading theirs." And that was the moment, if there was one moment, that Raymond stopped looking comfortable. Because he'd walked in believing his stack was a wall, and he was watching a tired woman in reading glasses turn every brick of it around to show him the date stamped on the back. Every single memo Harlan wrote to bury me, she was laying out in order, and the order was always the same. First, Vera did a protected thing. Then, days later, the company found a reason to write her up. First, the complaint, then the punishment. First, then. First, then. Like a heartbeat you can't argue with. She got through the whole 2 inches. Then she took off the glasses and she said, "Mr. Voss, every disciplinary document in this file post-dates a protected activity by less than 2 weeks. Every one. You've submitted, as your defense, a chronology of retaliation." Harlan reached for the folder. I saw him do it, actually reach out his hand toward it, like he could pull it back and unhand it to her. And there was nowhere for that hand to go. His own signatures, his own dates. He'd initialed every page. A man can't unsign. Then the examiner turned to me and she said, "Ms. Kostas, you've indicated you keep records." I said, "Yes." She said, "May I see them?" And I want you to picture this, because I've pictured it every day since. I stood up, 53 years old,
31 years on that floor, a widow they'd carried to the gate. I set the Charles Chips tin on the table. I took off the lid, and I did not make a speech. I've heard it said since that I gave some grand speech, and I didn't. That's not what happened. I don't have grand speeches in me. I took off the lid, and I turned the tin 1 inch toward her across the table. Just an inch. Slid it on the wood. That inch was everything I had to say. She looked in. She reached in, and she began to read the carbons, oldest first. And she read some of them aloud for the record. Dates first. Always the date first. Grievance, docked overtime, dated. Company response, none.
Safety complaint. Press number 6. Guard bypassed. Dated. And she paused and read my own words into the government record, into that humming room. My handwriting from 2 years back. Someone loses a hand on this press. Witnessed, she said, signed by a second steward. And she read his name, Merle Dietz. I didn't look at Merle, but I heard his chair. Company response to the safety complaint, she said. No action. Stamped, initialed, dated. And then she set that page beside Wen's medical record. My warning on one side. His degloved hand on the other. 2 years apart. She lined them up the way my father lined up a part against a print, and she didn't say a word about it, because she didn't have to. The dates said it. The paper convicted the plant with the plant's own ink. 26 months, she read through, the whole book, and by the end of it, that thick leather folder in front of Raymond might as well have been empty, and the rusty chip tin in front of me was the heaviest thing in the county. She closed the lid herself, gently, and slid it back the inch toward me. She said, "Thank you. I have what I need." The ruling came in writing, weeks later, but I knew it in that room. You could feel which way the air had tipped. They ruled the firing unlawful retaliation. All of it. The tardies, the memos, the 2-inch cage. The board called it what it was, a pretext built after the fact to punish protected activity. They ordered me reinstated, full back pay, every dollar from the day they walked me out. And this was the part that mattered most to me, more than the money, more than the job. They ordered the company to post a notice, on its own bulletin board, signed by the company, admitting what it did and promising in plain words never to do it again. Nailed up in the plant for every worker to read on the clock, the same bulletin board, you understand? The same board where Raymond had stood at the Monday meeting in front of 90 workers and pointed at me and said, "Every shop has a troublemaker. Ours finally has a name." That board. The company's own confession was going up on the exact wood where the slur was spoken. That's not something I won. That's something the paper won, and I just carried the paper. Now let me give you each of them, because they didn't all fall the same way, and each one earned his own quiet. Harlan first. Harlan Voss, who built the cage. Head office read that ruling, and they didn't see a personnel manager anymore. They saw a liability with a signature. A man who'd put the company's name on a chronology of retaliation, in ink, initialed. The very thing that made him useful to Raymond, his eagerness to write it all down and stamp it, was the thing that hanged him. They didn't fire him loud. Men like Harlan never go loud. There was a reorganization, a consolidation of personnel functions at the district level. Words. And Harlan Voss cleaned out his office into a cardboard box, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about who carries whose box to whose gate. Nobody carried his. He carried it himself, past the bulletin board, past the notice with his failure nailed to it. Then Raymond. Raymond Thibault wanted one thing in this world, and it was the regional promotion, the district office, up and out and away from the smell of cutting oil. He'd sold head office a story, a frictionless plant, no labor trouble, quota met,
everybody happy, the widow handled. That was his ticket up. And now his frictionless plant was a cited case, a federal finding, a notice on the wall. The promotion didn't get denied in some dramatic scene. There wasn't a scene. That's not how it works up there either. It just evaporated. The phone stopped ringing from the district office. The man they'd been grooming was suddenly a man attached to a problem, and up there, a problem sticks to you like paint. Raymond stayed plant manager of the plant he'd been so sure he was leaving. For a while. When? Wendell Boyd got his injury claim paid, and it was my 2-year-old warning that paid it. My no-action slip sitting next to his medical record, because once the board established, the company knew the guard was off that press and did nothing. There was no fight left in the claim. They paid it. It didn't give him the hand back. Nothing gives the hand back. But it gave him something, and it gave him more than that. Because they put the guard back on press number 6, bolted on.
The thing I'd asked for in writing 2 years before, a boy's hand taught them to listen. Cheap, in the end. It always was cheap. That's the part that sits in me. It was always so cheap to just do it right. And Merle. People ask me what I did to Merle, and they're hoping for something. They want me to have said a thing that cut him in half. I didn't say anything like that. He never testified in the end. Once the company's own file turned to poison in Harlan's hands, they didn't need a friend to call me disruptive. And Merle wasn't put in the chair. I think that was worse for him. He'd sold me for a foreman's slot, and then the sale didn't even go through clean. And there he was, still on the floor, still second steward, with a white shirt that never came. I came back to work, reinstated, and the first week back, I went to the steward's shack, the little steel desk, and I got out the second carbon book, the training one, the one I'd used to teach Merle how to keep the records when he came up as steward 20 years back. His handwriting was in the early pages next to mine. 2 young stewards learning to date everything. I walked it over to him at his machine. I didn't say a word about Raymond or the office or the tie or the list with his name typed on it. I just handed him the book. His own book. The one that taught him that paper matters, that a date is a fact, that you write it down because someday it's the only friend you've got. He took it. He couldn't look at me. 20 years, and he couldn't lift his eyes off the concrete. And I let him not. And I walked back to my machine. That was the whole of it. No speech. I gave a man back the proof that he'd once known better. Let him carry that. It's heavier than anything I could have said. The notice went up on a Monday. I want you to have this scene the way I have it, because it's the one I'd trade all the back pay for. Monday morning, day shift. The board where Raymond had named me. And nailed to it now, a white sheet. Government language at the top, the company's name at the bottom, under the words, "We will not." 90 workers came in off the lot with their lunch pails and their thermoses, and one by one they stopped at the board. And the presses weren't running yet. The floor was quiet, the big idle quiet, the same quiet as that Monday meeting, the machines holding their breath. 90 faces, reading. The same 90 that had looked down at the floor when Raymond pointed. This time they were looking up, reading the company tell on itself. Nobody cheered. This isn't a place where people cheer. But a fellow named Pruitt, run a lathe 40 years, caught my eye across the floor, and he took off his cap. Just took it off, and held it a second, and put it back on. And that was the plant's whole standing ovation. One old man's cap. And it was enough to last me the rest of my life. Then the shift bell rang, and 90 people went to work, and the presses came up 2 seconds a cycle, 800 times an hour. And the notice hung there over all of it. And it hung there a good while.
And I'll tell you exactly how long in a minute. Because Raymond had to come back to me. That's the part I still can't quite believe, even though I lived it. Corliss ran on a defense contract, made stamped parts for something the government bought. I never knew exactly what. Brackets, housings, the boring guts of bigger things. And a sited plant. A plant with a federal labor finding against it. That's a problem for a defense contract. Somebody up the chain gets nervous. They want labor peace on the record. They want a statement, signed by the workers' side, saying the trouble's settled and the floor's cooperative. And the workers' side, the elected steward, 3 times elected, reinstated by the government of the United States. That was me. So they sent Raymond. Of course they sent Raymond. Made him walk down to the steward's shack himself and asked the woman he'd called a troublemaker to sign a paper that would save his contract. He stood in the doorway, hat in his hand. I'd never once seen Raymond Thibault with his hat in his hand. I was at the little steel desk with the tin at my elbow, working my log, and I let him stand there a moment before I looked up. He said, "Vera," and he cleared his throat. He said, "Head office needs a labor peace statement for the contract." He said, "They're asking you to sign." And here's where the woman I used to be would have enjoyed it. The one from before. She'd have made him beg, but I was past that. I'd learned that the win isn't the grovel. The win is the terms. I set down my pencil. I said, "All right, Raymond, here's what it costs." I said, "The guard goes on every press in this plant. Not just number 6, every one, in writing." He said, "That's expensive." I said, "So's a hand. Next." I said, "The overtime you docked 2 years ago, the shift the floor earned on the rush order, that gets paid back to every man that worked it, floor-wide, not just my grievance, all of them." His jaw worked, same as it did at the hearing. He said, "Okay." And I said, "And the notice stays up, on that board, a full year, not a week, not a month, till the paint fades. 1 year, so every new hire that walks in the door reads what this company did and what it promised." He stood there in the doorway with his hat in his hand, and he looked at me, and I think for the first time in all the years I'd known him, he actually saw me. Not a troublemaker, not a widow with a file box. A shop steward, 3 terms, doing exactly the job the floor elected her to do, which is stand between them and the men who dock their overtime and bypass their guards. He said, 3 terms, like he was just now doing the math. I said, 3 terms, and I picked my pencil back up. He signed, all of it, and then he left, and I went back to my log, and I dated the entry, because you always date the entry. 6 months on now. Let me leave you in the plant, because that's where I've always been happiest, God help me, even after everything. Early shift. That gray-gold light that comes through the high windows before the day gets going. There's coffee steaming on the ledge by press number 6, and the guards on it, bolted and squared, and Wen Boyd is running that press 2-handed. The hand doesn't open all the way. It never will. But it's enough. He feeds, and he cycles, and he catches, 2-handed and whole enough. 22 years old, and going to be all right. And he brings me coffee some mornings, and sets it on my desk without a word. And that boy, I swear, that boy has Stefan's exact way of not saying the thing he means. Raymond's gone. They transferred him, finally, out to a warehouse operation 2 states off, counting pallets. Harlan's gone for good. No plant would touch a personnel man with his paper trail. And Merle's still here. Still on the floor. Quiet now. Real quiet. The kind of quiet a man gets when he knows what he traded and how little he got. I don't cut him. We work the same floor. Some mornings, I even miss the friend he was before the price. But I keep my distance, and I keep my records, and he knows why. And that's a fair place for us to end. I got re-elected, 4th term now. And there's a new girl on the floor, 19, sharp, reminds me of me before the plant taught me what it teaches. And I'm training her the way my father trained me, and the way I trained Merle back when Merle was worth training. I'm teaching her to keep carbons, to date everything, to drop a copy in the tin. She asked me why. Why bother, she said, when they just tell you to throw it out? And I told her the truest thing I know. I said, honey, they will always tell you to throw it out. Every big man who ever docked a shift will tell you the paper doesn't matter. Nobody reads it. File it if you want. And they're lying. And here's how you know they're lying. They keep their paper. They just don't want you keeping yours. I said, keep the carbons. Because paper outlives every big man who tells you to throw it away. My husband died on a night shift with no paper and got called careless. I got walked to a gate with 31 years of paper and got called reinstated. That's the whole difference. That's everything. Same plant, same kind of men, and the only thing that changed the ending was a rusty chip tin full of dates. She's keeping her carbons now. I check. People want me to say I beat them, that I stood up and roared and brought a company to its knees. I didn't roar. I want you to hear that, whoever you are, wherever you're watching from. I never once raised my voice in 31 years, not at the meeting when he pointed, not at the gate when they carried my toolbox, not in that hearing room, not in the doorway when Raymond came with his hat in his hand. I never raised my voice. I just kept the receipts. And if you're out there tonight, in some plant or some office or some place where a big man is telling you your paper doesn't matter, and nobody reads those things anyway, you keep your copy. You date it. You drop it in a tin. Because someday the machine starts, and there's no ungiving it. And on that day, the quietest person in the building turns out to be the one who was writing it all down. Comment the town you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this one traveled.